Eagles Entertainment.
With the 12th pick in the NFL Draft, the Philadelphia Eagles select.
You're listening to the Journey to the Draft podcast.
Welcome to the Journey to the Draft podcast. I'm your host, Fran Duffy. We're going to have some fun today on the show breaking down cornerbacks, and we're going to do that with Dane Brugler at the top of the show here in Draft Buzz. Dane and I going to look at who a lot of people view as the top corners in this class, who's best in man-to-man, who's good in zone, who's the most versatile. We're going to cover all of that. Plus, we're going to talk about some potential turning points in this draft just a couple of weeks away. Excited as we get closer and closer to the 2021 NFL Draft. We're going to do all of that in Draft Buzz. After that, we're going to go now to the Blueprint, where I catch up with Cecil Lammey, who does a great job covering the Denver Broncos, a team that has one of those pivotal selections in the top 10 of this draft. Is Denver going to move up? Are they going to move back? Are they going to stay put? What positions could they be targeting? Which players make the most sense? We're going to hit all of that with Cecil in that segment before we wrap things up with Draft Mailbag. We've got a couple of questions, team-specific questions from you at home. One that'll be about the Eagles, one that'll be a team from the NFC or the AFC North. We're going to find out all about that when we get to the end of the episode. Now, before we get to the start of the show, just a quick reminder, jump onto your Apple Podcast page. Do us that great favor of leaving us a rating, leave us a comment. We're getting closer to the draft. The interest will never be higher. Now is the time. Please help us out. For people that are looking for more NFL Draft podcasts, if you do your simple part of leaving us a rating and leaving us a comment, it helps boost our show up the rankings so that other fans can find this show. And then also, we can answer your question here on the podcast as well. So appreciate everybody that has done that, whether it's a specific prospect question, whether they want to stack players, rank them, look at your mock draft, really whatever it is. Just head on over to Apple Podcasts or Stitcher, wherever you're listening to your podcast, leave us a rating and a review. Also, if you're listening to this show right now, as we get closer and closer to the draft, maybe you're trying it out for the first time, maybe you're just trying to cram as you get closer to draft week, and you think, I'll just unsubscribe after the draft is over. I am here to tell you right now, don't do it. We keep this podcast rolling all year long. And no matter what time of year it is, this podcast transforms its shape and its structure. And the entire time, our entire goal is to make you smarter about this entire process. So if you're into who the top draft picks are, they're going to impact their future NFL teams. We're going to do that immediately after the draft. This entire draft class, the 2021 class, we're going to go team by team and talk about the players, the fits, all of that with their current team. So we'll do all of that early part of the summer. Also, if you want to know more about the process, if you want to hear from longtime NFL draft evaluators, whether they were general managers, area scouts, maybe they've been lifelong media members, I sit down with all kinds of people all across the landscape, and we do those conversations starting in June and really just kind of pick their brain and learn more about their scouting process. So if you want to get better at evaluating players and projecting them, we've got you covered right here during the summer. If you want to start learning about next year's prospects, we're going to be doing those conference previews in full starting in July. So if you want to know who to watch on college football Saturdays, those start in late August. We're going to be doing our weekly previews. So look, you need to stay subscribed. Each and every week during the fall, we've got current NFL scouts on the show. We're talking about matchups, guys that are helping their stock in the draft. So if you want to get ready for next year's draft, make sure you stay tuned right here to this feed. We're covering Shrine Bowl, Senior Bowl, Combine, all that stuff. That'll all be great, but learn more. Become a smarter fan. Stay subscribed right here to the Journey to the Draft podcast. All right, that being said, that was a lot there. Let's keep this show going. We've got some news to get to here. We're going to talk about some of the top corners in this class as well, right here in Draft Buzz.
Now it's time for Draft Buzz.
All right, well, let's get this episode going now with Draft Buzz as I welcome in my friend Dane Brugler. And Dane, you've got to feel a nice relief right now, man. I mean, we're just under a week removed from the Beast making its debut over on The Athletic. If you haven't already, I'm sure you have if you're listening to the show, but make sure you go over to The Athletic and download Dane's full draft guide. Dane, give us a little bit of juice. So what's it like now that this is off your plate?
Well, it's been nice to reintroduce myself to my family. My kids have grown; they're big.
It's amazing, right?
Yeah, no, it really has been fun to send it out into the wild, and the feedback and messages on the draft guide's been awesome. It's a year-round process, so for almost a full year, I'm kind of working on this, tinkering and adding all these different details and notes and analysis and. It's fun that it's out there now. And so, 415 reports, over 600 players, ranked with the Pro Day data, which I'm very proud of, the NFL verified Pro Day data, which is so important this year with no combine.
Yep.
It's just, we're not going to agree on every player, and that's okay. I mean, this is just look at it as a resource, for information. And, I'm at my heart, I'm an NFL draft fan. So I produce something that I would want to read, that I would find value in. And so I think anybody interested in the NFL draft is certainly going to agree.
Can I ask you one process question? Because a lot of our listeners obviously are very much into this whole thing. When you're doing all these reports, when you're trying to attack this document, do you go player by player, like, all right, I'm going to get all of the background work done, all the statistical work done, the birthday, everything? Or do you kind of like chip away and say, all right, I'm going to do today, Tuesday, September 11th, I'm going to do all of the background work on all the corners today, that kind of thing. How do you kind of approach the entire process to putting this thing together?
Yeah, I mean, I usually do it player by player. So I'll work on like the scouting part of it throughout the summer. Work on the year prior film, and then throughout as the film comes in during the fall, work on that and get the analysis where I want it. And then once we, as we go through the season, and I start to chip away at the background, and talking with. Because the background stuff is not like I sit down for an hour and I knock it out. It's a process where, I'm trading notes with a scout over the summer, and, you pick up these little random things, or, like I've got a good start on next year's, because throughout the course of the last year working on this guide, you pick up random things about a player returning to school, or, a teammate, or different things like that. So it really is I've got a document on my computer that's basically just a living document that I update continually throughout the year. So the goal is, by the time we get to January, February, March, when I'm polishing each report, most of the hay's in the barn at that point, where it's just I'm adding polish and putting the cherry on top. And I'm not scrambling to really research a guy at that point. So, it really is a year-round process.
It shows for sure in the final product. Such a useful document, no matter how much you love the draft. If you're just kind of a casual fan, or if you're a diehard hardcore fan, you want to make sure you go check that out. It was up on Adam Schefter's Twitter feed over the weekend. Peter King wrote about it in Football Morning in America. And those of you that saw that writing on Football Morning in America this Monday, you would have seen also Peter King spoke with Virginia Tech corner Caleb Farley, who said to him, Dane, that he's given has been given the thumbs up by NFL medical staffs in terms of his future coming off that back injury. Thoughts on that report? Obviously, we don't know if this is from all 32 teams, but at least somebody has given the thumbs up to Caleb Farley.
Yeah, you always kind of question it with because I really don't think that. The doctors, the medical staff, they work for the team, and it's not really their place to say, hey, you're still going to be a first round pick, or, that's just not their lane. And so, hopefully it is favorable information, or, it's favorable feedback that the doctors are getting, because Caleb Farley is such a good player, and I just want to see him on the field. So hopefully that is the case. And, we get a chance to see him, pretty early in his rookie year. That's kind of one of the question marks, is when is he going to be ready to play? Is he going to be ready at some point during camp? Is it going to be something where it's going to maybe, delay the start of his rookie season? All of these questions are going to go into the final grade and ultimately where he is drafted. But, to your point, we don't know which team or how many teams. Every team is going to view it differently, just like all the rest of these medicals. Different teams have different risks for appetite, different appetites for risk in terms of when they're going to jump on a player with medical questions. And, he's going to fall a little bit. How much out of the first round? I think it's still on the table. It's still possible, but definitely, positive, feedback. That's never a bad thing.
No question. And it's certainly one of the big names to watch here as we get closer and closer to the draft. Before we get into some of these pivotal points in the top 10, I think one interesting note, too, coming out of the weekend was the announcement that both Justin Fields and Trey Lance are going to have separate second throwing sessions. So Trey Lance having a second pro day, Justin Fields having a second pro day. And the San Francisco 49ers, it is reported that they will be at both of these sessions. And that was one of the things we had talked about after the 49ers had traded up to number 3 was, well, They didn't go to Trey Lance's pro day. They didn't go to Justin Fields' pro day. They went to Mac Jones' pro day over that. So with that being said, with John Lynch and Kyle Shanahan, again, reportedly, we don't know this to be confirmed yet, obviously, because it hasn't happened yet. But with them reportedly set to attend Justin Fields and Trey Lance pro day, that opens up the intrigue once again, the never-ending storyline here over the last couple of weeks of what the 49ers could do at number 3. It definitely adds to the intrigue here, Dane.
And I checked with my sources, and that they told me that the 49ers, this is basically for the 49ers. But any team can attend. So it'll be interesting to see, do the Lions go? Do the Broncos go to these pro days? The Patriots? That will be interesting as well, just to see who else goes. It's some of the questions we have about these players, I don't know that you're necessarily going to answer in a pro day. I think maybe just hopefully if you're Kyle Shanahan and the 49ers, you're hoping that you maybe get a little bit of interaction with the player, that FaceTime. But with no private workouts, no facility visits, the pro days are it. And so, you have to create these second pro days, but it's open to anybody. So it'll be really interesting. And it's funny. Do we think Kyle Shanahan has his mind made up and he's just keeping an open mind? Do we think he really is kind of split on what he wants to do? I mean, that's the thing. I'm talking to a source of a source of a source, different people talk. There are people on the 49ers staff who have no idea what they're going to do. And I genuinely believe that. I think this is Kyle Shanahan kind of keeping his cards close to the vest and still working the process. So I don't know. It's going to make for some really intriguing storylines the next few weeks leading up until draft weekend, even though, 2 weeks ago, 3 weeks ago, it was all Mac Jones. Now, after these pro days, we'll have to see if the wins kind of shift things.
Yeah, I think that look, the big thing that teams are missing from not having private workouts with all these players, not just with these quarterbacks, but with receivers, corners, safeties, linebackers, right down the list, is that you missed the opportunity to have a guy make the throws that you want him to be able to put on film. If you haven't seen him do this throw and he didn't do it at his pro day, we're going to make you do it at the private workout. Well, maybe the 49ers have had conversations with the representatives from both these guys and say, hey, you guys didn't put this on film for the pro day. We didn't see it on film. Can we see that now? And who knows how much that moves the needle? I'm not saying that it will, but I do think that it's interesting that we get to see. And as you mentioned, this isn't a private workout. I would think it would behoove every team to make sure you go, not even just to see Justin Fields or Trey Lance throw again, but it's another opportunity to get scouts on boots on the ground at these campuses to do final checkups with some sources, maybe get some early intel on some guys for next year as well. So certainly a couple things to keep in mind here for the 49ers going into these final couple of weeks. Now, the one thing I wanted to hit on with you before we got into our position preview of the cornerback position was just some of these teams in the top 10 that I kind of feel would be pivotal points in this draft that would kind of really kind of force how the rest of round 1 would go. And so let's just talk through some of these teams and how we kind of see this playing out. And I think, we've talked a little bit about number 3. Let's go to number 4 in Atlanta. How do you see this situation panning out? Really, there's a couple different options on the table for them, for the Falcons. How do you kind of see this situation panning out here for a new head coach and a new general manager?
Yeah, this is really the 49ers, we don't know which quarterback they're taking, but we know they're taking a quarterback. The Falcons at 4 is really where the intrigue really starts in terms of, the different dominoes that could fall. There's really 3 options here. They take the quarterback, which, it's the long-term play. Matt Ryan's going to be the starter probably this year and, at least, part of next year, if not the whole year. So 2 seasons maybe. But this is a chance to lock down the quarterback position. And, you have to ask yourself, if you're the GM, if Trey Lance goes somewhere else and plays really well as a rookie, meanwhile, Matt Ryan struggles a little bit, it might not look very good on you when you passed on him and you could have your quarterback situation figured out for the future. The other option here is you trade back for a boatload of picks and you get that ransom of picks that you're looking for a team desperate for the quarterback. That has to be an attractive option. And then the third option is just you take the best non-quarterback here, which in my opinion is Kyle Pitts. You add Kyle Pitts to that offense and let's have some fun. I think that'd be awesome to see. So to me, those are the 3 options. Right now, if you had asked me, I lean towards quarterback, being the best way to go and maybe the most likely at this point. But none of those three options would surprise me. What about you? Would any of those three surprise you?
Well, let me ask you this one. Let me throw out option 4. What if the deal, you mentioned the idea of trading out for a boatload of picks. What if the trade out isn't for a boatload of picks and that the return isn't quite what you like? If you ask both Terry Fontenot and Arthur Smith, maybe they'd say we need more young players. We need to get some young some lower contracts onto our books. Trading out is great. But what if you don't get that same return that you think that you would get? Because I think a lot of people think, they should be able to trade out for a ton. But what if it's not there? Or if you're like, hey, the best offer we're getting is from New England, but that means we're dropping from 4 all the way to 15. I do kind of wonder how you kind of weigh that against those. At the end of the day, and there was a report from ESPN's Chris Mortensen that, the Terry Fontenot wants to go with the quarterback. Arthur Smith is thinking that they want to go with Kyle Pitts. Now they're apparently aligned. Orlando Ledbetter had said, late last week, reported that everybody's on the same page. This is what we're doing. I am interested to see how this pans out, though. I mean, at the end of the day, I guess it's going to be Kyle Pitts, but I don't know, man. I mean, I think you can make a really good argument to take the quarterback there too.
What are you doing if you're the GM and which direction would you lean in their situation?
If I graded out the quarterback to be that guy, like if I said, hey, we feel that, let's say it's Trey Lance, or if it's Justin Fields, or if it's Mac Jones, whoever it is, and that guy's there, I think you got to take him, and you got to figure the money out later, because you're going to have to figure the money out from a Matt Ryan standpoint. And when you look a couple years down the road here with the Falcons, I mean, it gets really bleak. They're going to have a boatload of money poured into like 5, 6, 7 players on that roster, and they've got, and with no way out of a handful of them. So they have got to figure that part of it out. But I still think at the end of the day, if one of these guys, you can't guarantee, look, because you've got this talent, and with Arthur Smith's scheme, you're hoping that, this isn't, maybe they're not competing for the South from day one. But if this team was 8-9 here in 2022, I keep saying I have to incorporate the 17 game. If they're 8-9, is that super surprising? If they're 7-10, is that super surprising? I think that, if you have the opportunity to take that quarterback without having to give up all these extra assets, I think you would have to do it.
Yeah, no, I agree. And you look at Sam Darnold. He just completed 3 below average seasons, but because he had so much promise coming out and there's so much talent, he still got the Jets a pretty decent package in return in a trade. So, I mean, if you have a chance to get that young super talented quarterback early, you don't pass. You go for it. You figure it out later. Now, obviously, a lot of this depends on what are their specific evaluations on these quarterbacks. They might not love Trey Lance or Justin Fields if Mac Jones ends up going third. That obviously is a big part of that. I think maybe ideally would be they get a deal from, say, Denver. They move back to 9. They draft Patrick Surtain, which another part of this, which is crazy, is we might not see a defensive player off the board in the first 8 picks, which I don't think has ever happened before. And so, I actually went back as like the Super Bowl era, and the earliest a defensive player was drafted, or the latest a defensive player was drafted, was 99 when Champ Bailey went 7. So kind of crazy. But I think ideally, that's what the Falcons would maybe want, is you get that boatload of picks and move back to 9. You're still in the top 10. You get a good player like a Patrick Surtain, and you try and compete with Matt Ryan as your starter the next 2 years. I think that's what maybe they would want to do. But if they don't get that trade, to your point, they don't get that trade offer, then, I think the chance to sit and get the quarterback, that makes a lot of sense.
It certainly seems like that Champ Bailey record will be broken here in a couple weeks. Let's go to the next pick here. The Cincinnati Bengals at 5. And this one just seems kind of like a 2-man race, maybe a 3-man race. You got Penei Sewell, the left tackle from Oregon, wide receiver Jamar Chase, reuniting him with Joe Burrow from LSU, and then Kyle Pitts, the tight end, if he's available. What do you think makes the most sense here for the Bengals?
In my opinion, the one that makes the most sense is Penei Sewell. You have a quarterback who is currently injured because, he got hit quite often as a rookie, and, fixing or drafting a tackle here is not going to just magically fix all of that. And, going to keep your quarterback healthy, that's going to happen. But the chance to make upgrades on the offensive line is just way too appealing, in my opinion. Penei Sewell would be where I would lean, but I understand the other side of this. You have a chance to reunite Joe Burrow with Jamar Chase and kind of recreate that magic from the 2019 season. And the firepower on that Bengals offense, when you talk about, with T. Higgins and Tyler Boyd and Joe Mixon and, Joe Burrow's coming back healthy at some point, that'd be a ton of fun. And they added Riley Reef. So theoretically, you have your tackle situation figured out for the 2021 season with Reef as your right tackle, Jonah Williams as your left tackle. So you don't necessarily have to do that, but still, I have a chance to upgrade the offensive line. So that's where I would lean. I don't know if you agree or disagree with that.
Well, I think to me, the big thing that every team is doing, but I think the Bengals, especially in this situation, you're going to get everybody into a room, your whole scouting staff with the pro scouts as well, the teams that are the guys that are in charge of scouting the other NFL teams. And you're going to go through different mock draft simulations, and you're going to kind of go through and you're going to say, okay, who's our scout that's responsible for the Detroit Lions? Okay, what are their needs? Who's on the roster? Where do we see them going in this draft? Okay, now we're going to go down next down the line. Who's in charge of the Broncos? Okay, you go bang, 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 all the way through the draft. And you're going to try and weigh the different outcomes where it's, okay, if we take Jamar Chase in round 1, who are the tackles that are available for us in round 2? Vice versa now. Let's take Penei Sewell here in round 1. Who are the receivers or the corners or the tight ends that are available to us in round 2? And you're going to weigh that against each other. There's a reason why a lot of former scouts in the media will point to this and say, this is the way you got to have to look at it. Bengals, I would imagine, are having those same discussions. Hey, are we better off if we take Penei Sewell and then take, De'Ami Brown or just insert round 2 receiver here? Or should we take Jamar Chase and then let's say we get the second round tackle, whether it's a Liam Eichenberg or a Walker Little or whoever that player is there in the early parts of round 2. It seems like now, man, that they're going to go Jamar Chase, right? I mean, that's kind of like the late buzz, just around the media industry is that's the way that this is going.
And that brings up a fascinating topic. What you believe in, because I think it's pretty split. Like me personally, if I have a top 10 pick, I'm not going to allow what could be available in round 2 dictate who I take in round 1. That's me. And I understand both sides of it. I mean, the way you laid it out, it makes sense because at the end of the day, you want the best collection of players. You want the best value. But at the same time, I don't want the opportunity or the chance of a player being there to, point me. And now if you have like almost identical grades on a player, then it's a little different because, you're kind of flipping a coin, but I don't know that it ever really works out that way. Usually there's one guy rated higher than the other. And I'm taking that guy. And, unless it's just a colossal, such a weak class at tackle that there's not a single tackle between, until the 4th round or something like that, that there are certain exceptions, but for the most part, I'm going to stick with the best player available and, hopefully that works out for the best.
Yeah, I'm very interested to see ultimately what direction they go. Let's skip a couple of picks here and let's do our last team, Carolina at number 8. You take quarterback off the board with Sam Darnold now in tow. I think so, right? I mean, you put 3 picks. You really think so, huh?
I've talked to a few people who around the league think that the Panthers are ready to throw darts. If one of these quarterbacks were to fall to them, they said don't rule it out. So I think it's still a low percentage chance. Just I think there's probably a better chance that they're going somewhere else, like offensive line. But I'm just saying I don't think we can completely rule it out. Put it that way.
I guess the reasoning behind that would be this: if you were willing to throw X amount of picks to the Houston Texans for Deshaun Watson or to the Seattle Seahawks for Russell Wilson. If you said, hey, we've got this allotment of 7 picks or 5 picks that we were willing to shell out. Well, you just gave up 3 to get Sam Darnold. Why not throw one more at it and ensure that, hey, one of these 2 guys is going to work out. Justin Fields, Sam Darnold, we'll figure out the rest later. Maybe that's not a bad idea. And I guess that's something I could see. If they don't go quarterback, though, what's the direction you think they could end up going? They took all. Remember, this was a team last year that spent every single draft choice on defense, and I kind of wonder if that kind of leans one way or the other here this spring as well.
Right. It would be a surprise if it's defense here. I think we're looking at either offensive line or maybe Kyle Pitts. I just don't know if Kyle Pitts makes it there that far, but if he does, that would certainly make some sense. Offensive line, their left tackle right now is, I think, Greg Little. I think that's penciled in as their starter. I think if you either Penei Sewell or Rashawn Slater would present an upgrade from day one. So, I think if one of those two players are available, that would be certainly make some sense.
To me, like the Penei Sewell fit makes a whole lot of sense there at number 8 overall. So we're going to get into the Denver Broncos, who picked number 9 a little bit later with Cecil Lammey. But I just felt, those 3 teams, it's kind of interesting to just take a look at them and kind of go through the different scenarios of which direction they could ultimately lean. But
can I just throw out Detroit real quick too? Because at 7, if they would. I'm working on a 7-round mock right now, and it was in my scenario. There's a quarterback there, and I battled with it. Would they go quarterback there at 7, or would they go for the tackle like a Penei Sewell or one of the receivers? Like, I think that's going to be a tough conversation for them. Jared Goff's the guy for now. We know that. But this is a long-term rebuild. Do they love any of these quarterbacks enough to take the quarterback, or are they going to look at the non-quarterback? The Lions are really another fascinating team at all this because they could go either way.
The fascinating part about the quarterback now is that, it's easy for me to say, like what I said earlier about Atlanta, right? Where it's like, hey, look, if you got the chance to take the quarterback, take them. And I do ultimately feel that way. But I think a way that a lot of team builders are looking at this, and there's been a lot discussed in this element, is like, the idea of selecting a rookie quarterback and having him play on that rookie contract while your team is good, compete for a Super Bowl. If you take that quarterback while your team is still bad and you're trying to build, by the time he's ready, that's when, and now you got to pay him, and now you're not getting the full bang for your buck there. So I kind of wonder if you're the Detroit Lions, you're going to say, oh, look, we've got Jared Goff to get us through. The only thing, you're in that same situation. You don't know when's the next time you're going to be available to take one of those players. But at the end of the day, like it's really interesting. I'm fascinated to see how these quarterbacks go off the board. Do 5 go off in the first 8 or 9, or do we see 2 or 3, 3 or 4 go off and then a couple fall into the teens? It's what makes sense.
And with both Atlanta and Detroit, you've got first-year general managers, first-year head coaches. We don't have a track record with these guys as the head decision maker. So it's just another level of intrigue with both those picks.
All right. So from quarterback to cornerback, let's take a look at some of the best cover men in this class, Dane. And, usually you, me, and Ben, we would go through, and each of us will pick a guy from day 1, day 2, day 3. Obviously no Ben today. So it's just going to be the 2 of us. And we're going to kind of go through a couple different superlatives. And what I'm thinking is each of us will supply 2 names. One guy that's going to be talked in that day 1, day 2 discussion, and another one that's on day 3. And we'll start with man-to-man corners. I'll let you go first. Who's a day 1 or day 2 corner that you feel fits best in a kind of man-to-man environment?
I'm going with Caleb Farley, who we talked about earlier. He played more zone, I think, probably on tape, but I thought he did his best in man-to-man. Just a really high-level athlete. Wish we could have seen him test. I think he would have been off the charts. His burst, his speed, just different, especially for a guy that's 6'2", 200 pounds with 33.5-inch arms. Former record-setting quarterback in high school, then receiver, and then corner. Plenty of questions with, just 2 years of experience, playing experience at the position, and obviously the medicals. But I have no questions about his athleticism, and you see that in his man-to-man stuff.
Yeah, and there are a few corners in this class where you're like, all right, like he's great in man or zone. You look at Surtain, you look at J.C. Horn, you feel great about their ability to transition to any scheme. But there's always some corners, and I agree, Farley is one of them, where I'm like, early on, I would love to just see him in straight man-to-man. We had Greg Cosell a couple weeks ago talking about these top corners, and that's what he had said about Caleb Farley as well. I think you could say the same for Eric Stokes from Georgia, and they play, playing for Kirby Smart. They play man, they play zone. So you see reps of Eric Stokes there. But I think when you look at his traits and his skill set, he is built to play press man. He's got the length. He's got outstanding top end speed. I don't know if I want him playing from depth and reading routes and reading the quarterback and driving on throws. I want him up in the receiver's hip pocket and just let him use that foot quickness and that long speed to be able to stay so close to his opponent that, he could steal his wallet at any point in the down. And I kind of look at Eric Stokes as that kind of a player, just built to play press man.
Where do you think Stokes? Do you think he's a second-round player? Do you think he's a third-round player? Where do we see Stokes coming off the board?
So there's a team picking late in the first round that I feel there's a really good. It's just a really good fit.
Packers?
The New Orleans Saints. And with the amount of man coverage they play, you lose Janoris Jenkins here this offseason. They've got, it's getting a little bit of an older roster. That's one that really makes a lot of sense to me where I'm like, all right, the way that they play, I feel like Eric Stokes is certainly fit. Now, they may view him a little bit higher than other teams. If they're a zone-heavy scheme or something of that nature, you might look at Eric Stokes and say, yeah, like he makes a lot of sense for that team. Another guy that I would say if I'm going to get into like the late day 2 or early day 3, I feel like Marco Wilson from Florida is another one that's kind of viewed in that same vein, right? Where he's got outstanding, really, you look at the athletic traits, and he tested this way at Florida, but you just watching him, you could see that he moves as well as anybody, whether it's long speed, short area quickness. He's got that ability to shadow opposing receivers. He's got inside and outside versatility. His brother, Quincy Wilson, was a former second-round pick, didn't quite live up to that draft status, but this is a guy who's been a starter since day 1 for the Gators, came in, and again, he's got all the traits to be that kind of corner in the NFL.
Yeah, he's a really intriguing athlete. For me, for day 3, best man-to-man corner, I'm going to go with Zach McPherson, who, he does not get enough credit, I think, for as good of a player as he is. He started his career at Penn State, transfers to Texas Tech. The last 2 years as a starter for the Red Raiders, he's been outstanding. And he tested well above average, 5'11", 190 pounds. 4.48 in the 40. That's okay, average for a corner that size. But 40.5-inch vert, 10-10 broad, 6.84 in the 3 cone. The 1.53 in the 10 is a good time. So the athleticism is off the charts, and you watch him on film, and you see the same type of thing. You see fluid athleticism. You see twitchy feet. His ability, I really like how he uses the sideline in man-to-man. So he'll pin receivers against the white down the field. I really like his ability to hold up on an island. He's another guy can play man, can play zone, but his man stuff really stood out to me.
All right, well, let's transition now to zones, the zone defense side of things. When you look at this cornerback class, is there a guy on day 1, day 2 that really intrigues you from a zone system standpoint?
I think I'm going to go with Ahsante Samuel here. What he does in zone is really impressive and could get him drafted as early as the first round. You were talking about some of those teams in the late first. For a team that's looking for that zone corner, Ahsante Samuel is going to make a lot of sense. He's obviously not the biggest guy, 5'10", 180 pounds, but another guy tested really well. 4 threes in the 40-yard dash. He was under 7 seconds in the 3 cone. Going through his, I think all of his, going through his tape, all of his interceptions, I believe, came in zone coverage. He had 3 as a senior or as a junior in 2020. And I think all 3 were in zone coverage. That's where he did his best work. That's where he looked most comfortable. But I think he could play man just fine. I don't think it's not like he's a zone only guy. Just like I don't think he's an inside only guy. I think he could play outside as well. But I think he clearly did his best work when he was in zone coverage.
So for me, I'm going to go with the guy that I think most people have in the first round, but we'll see ultimately where he ends up going, and that's Northwestern's Greg Newsome. Now, he's a player like Stokes. When you look at it, you're like, all right, well, he's tall and he's got outstanding time speed. This guy's got press man traits, and he definitely does. But I think when you watch him in that Northwestern defense, you see him play from depth. You see him play from off coverage. He plays with really wide vision. He can read route concepts while reading the quarterback. He can jump throws. Only 1 career interception. It was a beauty, but it was only 1 career interception. So you do question even the ability to make the play down the field, find it late. I thought he was a little bit slow to get his head around at times. But this is a guy who I really like playing from depth, reading route concepts, understanding how offenses are trying to attack you. I think Newsome has the traits to be a really good zone corner, and he's got that physicality you look for out in the perimeter as well. I'll stay in the Big Ten for my second guy, just looking at day 3 players. Shakur Brown from Michigan State. He's a fun one, man. Honestly, like years ago, I think he would have gotten compared to like a Rondé Barber type player, just kind of, short and stocky and thick, and really, really physical. You just watch him play down against the run or, just attack bubble screens. He's a really fun player. You do worry about the athleticism, and I think that showed up at the pro day. He didn't test particularly well, and that does show up on film. But I think when you look at Shakur Brown, playing him in purely zone scheme, playing in the slot, he certainly does have that ability to make that transition to that kind of scheme.
I think some scouts saw that 4.6 that he ran at the pro day and kind of gave a fist pump in their head just because maybe he'll fall a little. Maybe
fall to us,
yeah. Get him in the 4th round now, mid 4th round, late 4th round. Yeah, we thought maybe he'd go top 100, maybe not now. So yeah, I think he's a good player, and similar kind of with my guy on day 3, DJ Daniel at Georgia. Yep. He didn't run very well. He ran a 4.58 with his 40-yard dash. Decent times with the rest of his pro day, but his 40 wasn't great. But he's another guy that it doesn't always look textbook with him, but there's something to him. I really liked his 2019 film at Georgia. I thought it was more consistent than Stokes or Campbell. But then this past year was almost a lost year for him. He was hurt. He had it was an ankle issue, I believe. And that really plagued him throughout the year. But, he's a guy that he puts himself in position. He's got a very aggressive mindset, which is also what I loved about Shakur Brown. He was not afraid to come off his man to make plays. And I think same thing with DJ Daniel. He can read, from different levels. And so a big fan of what he could, the value he could bring on day 3 of the draft.
All right, let's go to best run defender, a guy that really makes his presence known coming downhill. I'll let you kick things off. Who's a guy day 1, day 2 that you really like against the run?
Let's stick with Georgia. Go with Tyson Campbell, DJ Daniel's teammate, who, obviously with a guy that size, you hope he's physical. You expect him to be physical. And with Tyson Campbell, he did not disappoint. 6'1", 195 pounds. High to low tackler, he'll sideline to sideline stuff. He is not afraid. And he's not uncomfortable coming downhill and striking ball carrier. So he's a guy that will find ways to get his man on the ground, and he'll go for the big hit. So Tyson Campbell's ability and run support jumped off the film.
He would have been my pick for that as well. Just one of the most violent, competitive corners that I've studied, certainly in this class, but really in recent memory. I'll go with a guy that I feel like is going to be a day 2 selection in this draft, and that's Paulson Adebo from Stanford. And this is a player that opted out this past year. Some people might see a transition to safety. I do think that he could play corner, and I do like him most, especially in a zone scheme. I thought you saw plenty of that at Stanford, but his ability to find the ball late, that's impressive. He's a big kid, but watching him come downhill and play against the run. And look, there are a lot of people that might be listening to this and say, like, Fran, we're talking about corners. Who cares about their ability to defend the run? When you talk about today's game with the RPOs, the quick screens, with jet sweeps, the ability to tackle as a corner is as important now as it's ever been. You've got to be able to make those stops one-on-one on an island. And if you can't, you are going to be a liability for your defense. So I think Tyson Campbell certainly checks that box, more than checks that box. And I think Paulson Adebo as well is another guy that will come down and be a big presence for you down in the flats. And then a guy on day 3 for me, Rashad Wildgoose, who I think has an outside shot at late day 2. I don't know if you feel that way about him, but as a nickel corner, this is a guy who I really like the way that he played. He's got a really fun play personality, really competitive. Only played a couple games this year. I know he was banged up in Wisconsin. They played like one game and then they had like 4 or 5 weeks off just because of everything that they were worried about from a COVID standpoint. But Wildgoose is a really interesting player. And you go back and watch him a year ago. He's got inside-outside versatility. I like the physicality. He's one of my favorite, I would say, like nickel corners in this class. And he would be certainly a guy to keep an eye on from a run defense standpoint.
Yeah, that's interesting. I just did not get there with Wildgoose. I grade him as a PFA.
Interesting.
I couldn't get there. I think everything about him just screamed average to me. Size, speed, the strength, his play strength that he played with. I grade him as a developmental player who maybe could be more. I wish we would have seen more of him this year. He only played in the 2 games, got hurt. He's a guy that has ability. I don't know. I didn't, and this is a really deep corner group. And with Wildgoose, I kept putting him up next to guys like Lenore from Oregon, or, and I just, I think I would lead Lenore there, before you know it, he's like your 40th corner. So for me, that's just how I viewed him. So I see him a little bit different, but I do agree with you for this category that does make some sense with where he fits. For my guy on day 3, I'm gonna go with Benjamin St-Juste, who I did not expect to be a very physical run defender. That's not, he's a lanky guy. He's 6'3" and he's 200 pounds. So he's a lanky guy, long, lanky, really impressive athlete. A guy that size, and he has a 6'6" 3 cone is, rare. It's not common at all. But he's a guy that, he showed up in run support. He was not afraid to come downhill. And I think that length that he offers really helps cast a wide net in terms of getting the ball carrier on the ground. And so I was going through, and I wrote this in my report, of the 7 or 8 tapes that I studied, he had 1 missed tackle. And that's what you're looking for from these corners. You don't have to, necessarily, grade off the charts as a tackler. Just get your guy on the ground and don't make mistakes. And I think that's what St. Juice gives you.
Yeah, he is a really fun player. And if you're only going off what he showed at the Senior Bowl, you'd say, all right, well, he's got the guy, he showed some flashes. You go back and watch the film, you see those same flashes. For a guy that big to move the way he does and also play with that same temperament, I think he's going to go a lot earlier than people think. He's a really intriguing talent for sure. All right, let's go to some versatile players. And I want to kick things off here, Dane, because this guy, I had him with my corners the entire way. And we had always talked about this. All right, is he a corner? Is he a nickel? Is he a safety? And I kind of look at Elijah Molden now as more of my safety group. And I think he's right up there with like Richie Grant as maybe the top safety in this class. And that's we didn't talk about him when we did the safety. So that's why I wanted to make sure I brought him up here. He's got that versatility to play in the slot and do all that. But he can play man, he can play zone, he can blitz, he can play the run. Elijah Molden just checks so many boxes. His dad was a former first-round pick at corner. You can say the same about a handful of corners in this class. Another second-generation NFL player, but Molden, he is one of my favorite players to watch. Just when you're looking at that play personality, that ability to play inside. If you're looking for that. Buda Baker, Honey Badger type of player. I think Elijah Molden is going to be able to fill that role.
Yeah, I agree with you. I mean, my top 6 corners, I list him as a corner. I agree with you.
I don't blame him. Yep.
That nickel corner but you could also call him a nickel safety. So it's, it's just wherever he fits.
I do wonder if we're going to get to the point where we separate those guys, where the nickels, whether it's a nickel safety or a nickel corner, they are just their own group. I do wonder if we'll ever get to that point.
I wouldn't be surprised if we do. It's just the way that base packages are across the league and, different personnel that teams are using. But the top 6 corners in my rankings, 4 of the top 6 I have NFL bloodlines, dads that play the NFL with Surtain, Horn,
Samuel,
Molden, and Samuel. Right. So with Molden, and something intriguing with him is he did not perform very well at his pro day. He ran a 4.60 in the 40. I was talking to a scout last week about that and how I didn't think he'd run great. I thought he'd run like mid 4.5s. Yep. So the 4.6 is a little disappointing, but I was talking to a scout who said that he's like, did you notice that he didn't run or he didn't do the shuttle or 3 cone? And I said, yeah, a lot of guys do that. And he's like, no, he hurt his hamstring. And I said, oh yeah, that's right. I remember I heard he hurt his hamstring. And he said, but he actually hurt it before he ran his 40. And so you got to factor that in it was more of like, and he probably shouldn't have, run the 40, or maybe he hurt the hamstring running his first 40. He really shouldn't have run it, but the scout said he's just that competitive of a guy that he said, no, I'm going to tough it out. I'm going to run this thing. I'm going to get it done. And so, even if he really is a 4.54 guy or something, that's something that's the type of context you have to keep in mind with these pro days. So like that fit there with Elijah Molden. For my most versatile, I'm going to go with, I know a guy that is one of your favorites, Aaron Robinson at UCF.
Oh yeah, good one.
Inside, outside, you could mix and match, from day one. I think you're a guy you're going to put in the starting lineup and you're just going to be able to rotate them. It doesn't matter, what the offense is doing with their groupings, with their receivers. You can mix them inside, outside, maybe even play some safety with him. You can there's really no limit to where you want him to line up across your secondary.
Can I throw another name at you real quick? We're all only going to do one name here, but Darren Hall from San Diego State played outside corner for the Aztecs. Goes to the Senior Bowl as a redshirt junior, and they played him at safety the whole week. But watching him on film, he reminded me a lot of former Oregon corner Terence Mitchell, who's been a spot starter here in the NFL. He's been starting for the Browns most recently. And I think Darren Hall he's ideally more of a backup like Mitchell. But I think when you look at the measurables and just the play personality the same way, I felt like he was that kind of a player. So I do have him with my corners. But this is a guy, again, showing off that versatility to play safety. Is that kind of how you viewed him as well? Did you view him more as a corner or as a safety?
I grade him as a corner, but yeah, seeing him line up as a safety, it certainly gets you thinking like, okay, yeah, the more you can do. And with him, he tested really well at his pro day. He was 4.41 in the 40. His jumps were outstanding, 38 and a half and 11 in the broad. But he has production. There's plenty of good stuff on tape. I mean, he's going to be one of those day 3 values that could easily end up outplaying where he's drafted.
I 100% agree. 100% agree. Let's go to our final category here. Player comparisons. As we like to do, I'll let you kick things off for this one. What was one player comparison that stood out to you?
So this is an interesting one because I'm actually comparing him to a safety. And that's Cam Bynum, who I think could maybe take that Jordan Poyer route where, because Jordan Poyer was a corner come out of college. And ultimately he kind of got moved to safety because he didn't really quite have enough to stay at corner. Cam Bynum could be the same thing because with Bynum, what you love about him, his toughness, his competitiveness, his football IQ. And he's not a bad athlete. He just might not be quite what you're looking for at corner. He ran a 4.56 at his pro day in the 40, under 7 seconds in the 3-cone. I just don't know that he necessarily has exactly what you're looking for from a twitch standpoint, from a long speed standpoint to stay at corner against NFL athletes. But move him maybe to safety or, the kind of a hybrid role. I think that might make that fit that work. So Cam Bynum possibly on that Jordan Poyer path to an NFL career was something that stood out to me.
I love that. That's a good one. I'm going to go here. The guy we mentioned earlier, Tyson Campbell. I mentioned this back even like in the summer when I studied Campbell. He reminds me of Marlon Humphrey in so many ways. When Humphrey was coming out of Alabama, obviously he played for Kirby Smart in Alabama as well. But that physicality, even though the size and the speed, but then the questionable ball skills as well, that kind of matches with Marlon Humphrey as well. So from a profile standpoint, from a play style standpoint, from a height, weight, speed standpoint, I think that Tyson Campbell and Marlon Humphrey certainly check a lot of boxes. And then I'll throw one more at you late in the day. Brandon Echols. From Kentucky, undersized, kind of a outside corner. Can he play in the nickel? But a great athlete, timed extremely well across the board. You see that on film. He's an outstanding, really easy mover. How about like an Dory Jackson? And I think when you look at Brandon Echols, look, Dory Jackson went first round. Echols isn't going to go first round. But you look at some of the things that what he can be, and also some of the issues he's had, because Dory Jackson has had some issues so far in the NFL. I think when you look at it, a lot of the similarities, I think that people liked, and I kind of wonder where Echols will go off the board. Kentucky sneakily has a handful of draft picks coming from that team.
Yeah, they certainly do. For Echols from his pro day, 5'10", 179 pounds. So, doesn't have the size, but 4.35 in the 40. His jumps, 42.5 inch in the vert, 11.4 in the broad, 6.84 3-cone. So, I mean, you were dead on saying he killed it at his pro day. He certainly did. A JUCO guy, goes to Kentucky and, former offensive player. That's his background. Yep. So still kind of learning. I mean, he's kind of the ideal practice squad candidate. If you can keep him on there and, keep a team from poaching him, but keep him on your practice squad, develop him. And, he has the athleticism where you feel like there might be something more there.
It was the offensive background standpoint that had me thinking of Dory Jackson as well, because Dory was kind of a two-way player during his time at USC. That was what kind of started me down that path, but certainly a really intriguing player. Well, Dane, we've covered a bunch of corners. We talked about some of the pivotal points. Let's keep the conversation going here with Cecil Lammey here in the Blueprint. We're going to talk about the Denver Broncos, one of those teams in the top 10 that could dictate the rest of how round one could go.
Compassionate and trusted care. Clinical expertise. It's the cornerstone of NovaCare Rehabilitation and why they're the leading provider of physical therapy throughout the Delaware Valley. Don't let aches and pains or any injury slow you down. Schedule an appointment today at NovaCare.com. The Philadelphia Eagles choose NovaCare, so can you. NovaCare, the power of physical therapy.
All 32 teams are always under construction. How are they being built? Let's check out the blueprint.
Well, excited to welcome into the Blueprint this week here on the Journey to the Draft podcast, a guy who knows this Denver Broncos team inside and out. That's Cecil Lammey. Cecil, thanks for joining us here on the show.
Yeah, man. Always a pleasure to talk to you, and always great talking football.
So obviously, we're going to take a look here at the Denver Broncos and their potential draft strategy entering this year. And this is a team that has seen a little bit of change, a little bit of turnover here this offseason. Obviously, the coaching staff stays intact, but in the front office, John Elway kind of steps to the side. George Paton hired as the new general manager from the Minnesota Vikings organization. And so while we can't look back at draft trends and say with certainty, this is how George Paton believes and this is his history, based off the research you've done and the conversations that you've had with him and the media availabilities that he's done, I'm interested to kind of get 3 different points of things that we could just kind of keep in mind for the Broncos as they currently sit 9th overall. What would be the first point for you that's something just to kind of keep in mind when thinking about the Denver Broncos here for this draft?
Something to keep in mind in examining what Rick Spielman did with George Paton there as a right-hand man with the Minnesota Vikings is you're going to get a lot of picks. You're going to see some maneuverability from the Denver Broncos, whether that's up or down. That's debatable. There's some buzz actually both ways. We'll get to that in a little bit, but really looking over that history over the last, 5 years, nobody's made more picks than the Minnesota Vikings. So that's what you're going to see. If you're a Broncos fan, expect to be a very active draft period, expect to have quite a few players, quite a bit of quality depth added. But I think the first thing to note with George Paton and his likely strategy is to be light on his feet and to move around and to gather picks. That's what you'll get if you're a Broncos fan.
And that is something that I think a lot of people would view as analytically friendly, as, hey, let's get more bites at the apple. That's one way certainly to look at it. And Minnesota obviously comes from, that school of thought. And a lot goes into that. We talked with Arif Hassan from The Athletic earlier this offseason about, Rick Spielman and his approach. So certainly that matches up. What would be the second thing for you?
Second thing for me is always look for players where everyone's zigging, they might be zagging. Right. And we've seen that before with the history of the Minnesota Vikings, and they're always looking for value. When you have a player, let's say like a Dalvin Cook that falls, they're quick to scoop him up. Now he's one of the best running backs in the game. So you're going to watch for value picks with this team. You're also going to look at, he's going to have his own mind, if you will. Like I understand mock drafts and all the study and the research that goes into all of us that do mock drafts. Well, George Paton's going to be a little bit difficult to pin down. So, and something that I'm also finding out locally is, with the Elway regime, you might hear some things, you might pick up on some things. The hatches are battened down pretty tight with George Paton. Now he's the new guy, maybe people are just getting used to him, but there's not as many, leaks or as much buzz as you had in years past. So the, everything's run very tight, and also don't expect him to take who you think he's going to take.
Interesting. So, and obviously that's a little bit easier to do this year because of the isolated sort of process we've got. But that's very interesting to kind of know, maybe something off the wall there for Denver. What would be number 3 for you?
Number 3 for me with George Paton, in addition to being light on his feet and having the hatches battened down, is that he's going to look for the proper fit. We always talk about that, BPA and fit and all those sorts of things. But he's really done a great job in just literally a couple of months of finding players that fit in free agency, granted, for Vic Fangio, for that defense. And then, with Pat Shurmur, any sort of pieces that he will be adding, it's that same thing as well. And it's the dirty little secret in the NFL. But there's some people that don't necessarily follow that as closely as they should. So I think he's custom fit for who he's got. And he's giving a great chance in a year that, could be a hot seat year for Vic Fangio and Pat Shurmur and company. It's not like George Paton has come in and said, this is the way I'm going to run it, and you make these guys work. No, he's finding custom fit players for the staff in place right now. And I expect that to be the case in the draft as well.
Yeah, and I think that's an important note for fans. Regardless of what team you vote for or you root for, people say best player available, best player available, best player available. Well, you got to keep in mind, it's best player available for that specific team. It's not going to be best player available off of your board or Mel Kiper's board or Daniel Jeremiah's board or whoever's board. It's the best player available for their team. And you're always, in theory, trying to cater towards what your staff looks for, what your staff is going to use. And I think that's a good example of that.
Yeah, and I think that's a wise thing for a general manager to do. He's often talked about no shortcuts. Well, what does that mean? No shortcuts means it's going to take some time. No shortcuts means slow and steady wins the race. And he also talks about drafting and developing. If you look at a draft class and someone says, wow, look, they got 4 starters as rookies. Yeah, but did 2 of those guys actually deserve to start as rookies, or were they kind of forced to do that? What you'll see is draft and develop, probably a couple of quality rookies near the top of the draft to plug and play as the starter, and then develop the rest, help the special teams out, draft fully, more picks, as we've been saying. This should be all part of George Paton's plan.
All right, so let's take a look now at this front office with George Paton, and also the coaching staff as well. Are there any college programs, any schools that this staff on either side of the coin have connections to that are important to kind of keep in mind when we go into this draft?
I think it's an interesting question with this staff because it's new with Paton at the top. And I want to be very clear. Like, there's a lot of people that say, Elway's still there pulling the strings. No, John is stepping to the side. I like the way that you put that. He's not stepping back. He's not stepping forward, obviously. He's stepping to the side and allowing Paton to make these decisions. Elway will be like a tiebreaker in the room, so to speak. But I would look at UCLA and I'd look at Stanford. Stanford, just because of all the rich tradition and history that Stanford's had with the Denver Broncos, whether it's John Lynch or John Elway himself. UCLA, because, well, that's where George Paton went to school. So, you look at the schools. I'll tell you one school that they won't hesitate to take from, and this is a bit odd because they took Jerry Jeudy last year. But John Elway always had difficulty picking an Alabama player. I don't know whether it's Dante Hightower or whoever. Like, I don't know exactly why. And obviously that changed with Jerry Jeudy for good reason, because Jeudy is a fine talent. But I think now you won't have that hang up. Maybe it's just a local thing, but I know that we always complained about why isn't he looking at more Alabama players? I don't think that's going to be a problem for George Paton. So I would say I love the question. I thought UCLA, Stanford, those are 2 teams with a connection with this staff that, comes down to tiebreakers. Maybe that's your guy.
Yeah, there was a connection there. Butch Jones was, I read about this leading up to the draft last year. Butch Jones, who was longtime head coach of Tennessee, was an offensive analyst with the Crimson Tide over the last few years. I believe now, I forget where he's at now. I don't think he's still in Alabama. But Zach Asiani, who's the wide receivers coach with the Denver Broncos, was very tight with Butch Jones. And I think that kind of helped foster that comfort level with Jerry Jeudy last year. And so we'll see if that's something that continues to create here in this draft. Okay, let's get into now. You talked about trying to fit things for this coaching staff and talk about need and best player available. What would you say are the 3 biggest needs as we sit here right now, just a couple weeks out from the draft?
Is it time to talk about quarterback?
Yes.
Every 30 minutes, I'm obligated, contractually obligated, to talk about the quarterback position with the Denver Broncos. That's the big one. I mean, when you don't have the guy, you're looking for the guy. And whether or not Drew Lock is the guy, whatever. George Paton's first move was to almost trade for Matthew Stafford, so much so that they thought they had him. And I know that others have reported like, no, they really didn't want, Stafford, and they kind of checked in. And once the Lions brought up Drew Lock, then they were out. No, that's not the case. They thought they had Stafford. Obviously they don't. So they're looking for a quarterback upgrade. They were always tepid on Sam Darnold as we see him move on now. Quarterback will be that need. It always will. And whether that's bringing in a veteran and having him push and compete, something that Jeff Driscoll did not do last year with Locke, or whether that's drafting someone at 9 or moving up. The most recent buzz is moving up. If they can in this draft to find their guy, whoever that is. So quarterback is that number 1 need. I will then say inside linebacker, something that Vic Fangio has avoided. And if you look back at Vic Fangio's history, I'll go back to the Dome Patrol. Then I'll go to, Vaughn Johnson and Sam Mills, God rest his soul, and that type of player. Patrick Willis with the 49ers, Roquan Smith with the Chicago Bears. Vic Fangio's always had like a stud inside linebacker. He doesn't have that here. Now, he passed on Devin Bush. You're sitting there at number 10. You're like, man, we're going to move back and get Noah Fant, who's a fine player in his own right. But, he's been a little bit stingy. and the inside linebacker position last year, not getting Patrick Queen or Kenneth Murray or anybody like that. So maybe is this year they do that with inside linebacker, perhaps. And then even though George Paton fixed the biggest weakness on the Denver Broncos, which is cornerback, he did that through free agency with Ronald Darby, of course, getting Fuller in there as well. It's still a position of need, in my opinion, because you have Fuller on a 1-year deal. Callahan's got 1 year left on his deal. And, Michael Ojemudia looked really rough last season. I don't think you moved him to safety just yet. You give him another shot, and that means you draft a corner. So I think quarterback, inside linebacker, and cornerback are the 3 biggest needs for the Broncos this year.
So with those needs in mind, and going back to something you said earlier, the no shortcuts line from George Paton, do you feel like they will press to try and get, to satisfy one of these needs? Are they going to go straight best player available? How do you feel that they will approach this draft?
Well, they'll approach it the way George Paton's approached everything, because he's calling everybody. He's in on all these conversations. They were in on Matthew Stafford. As I said, they thought they had him. They checked on Sam Darnold, and they're like, they made a different decision there. So they're picking up the phone. I'm fairly certain they'll be calling Atlanta at number 4, right? I think every team, if you're serious about upgrading your quarterback, you move up to 4, because there's 5 players that we could say 5 quarterbacks specifically that could go in the first round, and obviously perhaps even in the top 10, maybe even before the Broncos pick at 9, although Carolina with their move for Darnold kind of changes things there, because they're at number 8 right in front of Denver. So being aggressive without, being desperate, I think is the best way. And that also means he has to find a guy that he loves. So who is that player that he loves? He did not go to the Senior Bowl. He was new, and he wanted to put, kind of deep dive on his own players. So he didn't see Mac Jones down there in Mobile. I thought Mac Jones put in a fine performance in that week of practice. He did not go to either one of Mac Jones's pro days. So, is that gamesmanship? Do they really like him and they don't want anyone to know? Does he not like him, and that's why he didn't go? These are all the questions floating around on Denver Sports Talk Radio right now. But that's the George Paton line, is he's going to be in on everything. He's going to be aggressive, but not to the point of desperation.
And it's going to be certainly really interesting. Is there a player or two, we talk about Mac Jones, that are being mocked to the Broncos right now that you feel like makes sense based off some of the things that and that we've talked about already in this segment?
Yeah, what's interesting with the Jones conversation, I think a team like the Saints, the Patriots really could thrive with a player like Mac Jones, because he fits a certain system. I don't think he fits Pat Shurmur's system, but there are people close to the team, and there are reporters who basically are the mouthpieces of the team, and that's fine. That's every market. But these reporters are going on and on about how great Mac Jones fits Pat Shurmur's system. I personally disagree with that. But whatever, you're seeing some Mac Jones. You're seeing the Broncos maybe even moving up for Mac Jones. That's interesting. I think Justin Fields, to me, is a guy that reminds me of a more polished version of Dak Prescott. When Prescott came out of Mississippi State, as you remember, he was a little rough as a passer. Of course, he was always under pressure for the Bulldogs, and that might have contributed to it. So, and I don't believe Trey Lance is going to be there. I think he goes at 3. But, you look at those mocks, those seem accurate. I've seen Patrick Surtain mocked to the Denver Broncos. I think that makes a lot of sense. Again, back to the Alabama thing, back to that need at corner, and you need to be grooming someone to come up and be a starter in 2022 or maybe even this season if he could beat out a guy like Ronald Darby, something like that. So those kind of mock drafts, Micah Parsons, I've seen mocked to the Denver Broncos. That makes a lot of sense to me, going back to the linebacker thing. And you need a modern day linebacker. You need a linebacker, because Alexander Johnson and Josie Jewell are both old school. They're 2-down thumpers. They can't cover. You need a guy that can cover with all these tight ends. And by the way, you're in the AFC West, where tight ends seem to be king. And the best one here is Darren Waller, in my opinion. I think he's the best tight end in the league, although Travis Kelce would have something to say about that. So modern inside linebacker like a Parsons, that would make a lot of sense to me too.
Do you feel that, look, Carolina obviously basically removing themselves from the quarterback discussion, does that up the ante where it's like, all right, do we need to necessarily make that move up? Do we kind of let the board fall and we'll see how it goes on draft day? I'm interested to see what is kind of the buzz right now out in Denver when it comes to the Broncos potentially moving up.
The buzz is they're going to move up. That's more likely than not. If you look at three things which are possible: staying put, moving up, or moving back. Right now, I would put my chips on moving up in this draft because control your own destiny. Control what you can control, and why sit there at 9? And Carolina that was a big move for the Broncos. That was a win for the Broncos, especially if you're one of the fans who want a new quarterback, who want one of these rookie quarterbacks, one of those 5. So you look at the situation now and you say, okay, well, that's cleared out of the way. But with 4 for sale, the Patriots could jump them. The 49ers already leapfrogged them. Because you look at the teams that, could have been behind the Broncos that maybe they would have moved up to 9. Like, no, the 49ers said, we're getting our guy. So they move up to 3. If you're the Denver Broncos now, I say control your destiny. Go get your guy. Again, if you fall in love with one of these guys, go get him. Don't be desperate. Peyton won't do that. So I think moving up is most likely for the Broncos as we sit here on April 9th.
And in this unique year, obviously, too, keep in mind the relationship. Pat Shurmur was the offensive coordinator here in Philadelphia. His quarterback coach for a couple of those years, Ryan Day, now the head coach at Ohio State. So get a little extra intel there on Justin Fields. You mentioned a handful of players that you felt really fit and made sense. Is there anybody that's being mocked that you're like, I don't quite see that here in Denver?
Penny Sewell's not falling to 9. Come on. And I understand the exercise of mock drafts. Like, we all do them. We all go through them. We all read them. And man alive, do people love them. They love to destroy them. And if you did a mock draft every single week, it'd probably mostly be the same, unless you take an examination and looking at things differently and potential trades. And what if this guy falls? Those are interesting, but really, Penny Sewell's going to fall to 9. Really? Does anybody believe that? I don't, and I see other tackles taken. A dear friend of ours, Chad Ryder, what he put Rashawn Slater to the Broncos at 9. Okay, fine. I get that. Jawan James is going to come back this year. He's going to play at right tackle. And if he's healthy, he's good. We all know that about Jawan James. So, the tackle thing is a little off in my opinion. And certainly the Penny Sewell thing. Every time I see one of those, I'm like, please, come on. Don't get Broncos fans, excited about something that they're never going to get because, in all reality, he should be a top 5 pick. We'll see if that actually happens.
So outside of the fact that it clearly seems that they're intent on trying to get a quarterback, any final advice to anybody who's, putting together a mock draft and they're picking for the Broncos?
Don't leave him at 9.
Yeah,
Don't leave him at 9. With George Payton, with that history with Minnesota, there's going to be activity. It's going to be like Step Brothers. So many activities, right? Yeah. That's exactly what it's going to be. So George Payton, John Elway, did they just become best friends? Yep. Now I'm just going to do Step Brothers quotes the rest of the way. But I mean, that's what you're going to see. If you are a Broncos fan, if you're someone that's mocking the Denver Broncos, don't leave him at 9.
There are worse ways to end a podcast than to just roll off a bunch of Step Brothers quotes. That's for sure. Well, Cecil, thanks so much for joining us here once again on the show. Stay safe, stay healthy. We'll talk to you again soon, man.
Stay frosty.
Now it's time to hear from you, the fans, in the Draft Mailbag.
Well, great stuff there from Cecil Lammey. Always great catching up with Cecil. Let's now go to a couple of your questions at home in our draft mailbag. And we've got a couple that we're going to get to. But first, I want to remind you guys, jump on to Apple Podcasts or Stitcher, wherever you listen to your podcasts. Leave us a rating. Leave us a comment. If you ask a question, we'll answer it here on the show. We're going to start things off with Kiwi 12345 6, a whole bunch of other numbers that I'll leave out. But Kiwi asks, after leaving a 5-star review, started off by some really kind words about the show and how much they enjoy it. I won't get into it. I'm a humble person, but Kiwi, thank you very much. Here's your question, and you asked 2 here, so I'll get to the first one first. First question has to do with Eagles cornerback Michael Jacquette, who I thought, and this is the question here, I thought demonstrated some real ability last year. He showed his youth in the Dallas game, but otherwise seems like a really good fit for the kind of corner suited for the new Eagles defense with long corners who have helped behind them. He compares favorably from an athletic standpoint to Patrick Surtain and J.C. Horn. I wonder what the Eagles think of him as they plot their draft strategy, since they will never say. Maybe I can get your thoughts on the matter. So, Kiwi, to this first question, look, I have no idea how the Eagles look at Michael Jacquette and how he figures into their future plans. What I'll say is I would think that it's unlikely that they view him up to the level that you would pass on a great talent at that position. And it's always going to come down to how the board is stacked for that individual team. In this case, it would be the Eagles. So if the Eagles have one of these corners ranked higher than everybody else that's on the board, do you look at your roster and you look and say, all right, do we have the cornerback depth to prevent us from making this kind of selection? Are we going to get the bang for our buck by selecting Patrick Surtain or J.C. Horn, the two of the players that you outlined there, ahead of somebody else at a different position? My God, we have no idea how they're going to view that, but I think it's an interesting way to look at it. I'm glad you brought up Michael Jacquette because I would agree with you that this is a scheme that is well suited for his skill set. I'm excited to see what he looks like here in the spring and in the summer. Certainly a name to keep an eye on there in the Eagles secondary. No one's really talking about him, but certainly a young player who showed some flashes last year as a rookie. Number 2, the second question, and this is going right back to Kiwi. The second question has to do with the Eagles' new scheme and the role of the linebackers. For the Colts and the Vikings, Jonathan Gannon's background, their linebackers were prominent players who can blitz, cover, and stop the run. The Eagles would seem to need a player like Micah Parsons in that model who would give them flexibility to match several different offenses. Jamin Davis might also fit. To me, those players seem more viable for an Eagles defense than is generally appreciated. The Eagles are said to, quote-unquote, not value the linebacker position, but I don't know if that remains true in the new scheme. In many draft simulations I've done, Micah Parsons is the most talented player still available. Thanks again for your hard work. So, Kiwi, I think this goes back also to the last question about corner, right? And I think when you look at the entire board and you say, okay, who's the best player for us? And every team is going to make that evaluation. They've been doing it over the last several weeks, right? They're looking at how they're going to stack their board. And, I ironically enough, had this conversation with Blake Bedingfield this week over on the Eagle Eye in the Sky podcast, which if you're not subscribed, make sure you go check that out. We talked, and Blake is a 19-year veteran of being a college scouting director for the NFL, or for the Tennessee Titans in the NFL. So he's got a pretty good insight into this process. We talked about stacking the board and setting it and when the adjustments happen. And we talked about really just what just goes into that part of the process. So all of these teams, they're looking at all of these players and they're setting the board all throughout the spring, January, February, March, and now up into April. So if you're looking at Micah Parsons, or if you're looking at Jamin Davis, how do they stack compared to a couple of the corners you outlined earlier, to the receivers, to the offensive linemen, to the defensive linemen, right on down the list? You might say, look, and I think that's an interesting conversation when you start getting into linebacker. I was talking about this with Ben Fennell, actually, offline earlier today on Monday. And we were just kind of discussing, what is it that when you talk about linebackers and coverage, obviously guys need to be able to play in space. That is a necessity in today's NFL. But do they need to be pure man-to-man players? Do they need to be great zone coverage players? It's going to change scheme by scheme. In some, it doesn't matter what you can do. Like, Demario Davis is one of the better linebackers in the NFL, I think most people would say, for the New Orleans Saints. He's rarely used in coverage. He's a guy that is almost always used getting after the quarterback. And I think it all comes down to usage and the scheme and the coaching and all of that. So, when you talk about what is useful in this scheme and the Eagles' new scheme, and we don't know what it's going to look like, the coaching staff has been working with the scouting staff and saying, this is what we want for our linebackers to look like. Who are the guys on our roster that can do X, Y, Z? Do we need more bodies there to help us? If so, here's what we're looking for. Here are the core factors. Here are the position-specific factors that we're looking for at the linebacker spot. And so they'll try and see if they can hunt and peck and find guys that fit that role. And we'll see. We'll see ultimately how they feel about it. But Kiwi, good questions there. Thanks so much again for the kind words. Now let's go to our one final question here. Lou B7175 left a 5-star review saying, Browns fan here. This year, I see them using most of their picks on defense. At 26, knowing that they're looking at edge and corner, I wonder if Quiddy Pay is there. Would you take a look at him or go corner and look at Greg Newsome or Caleb Farley if he drops? Thanks, and keep up the good work. So, Lou, it's a great question. And a few weeks ago, for the Blueprint segment, we actually had Brent Sobleski on talking about the Browns. We talked about what are some of the things that we noticed in the first year of their draft with this new regime. And, certainly going back, looking at last year, certainly seemed like they stuck to best player available, right? Regardless of position, they were just going down and saying, who's the best player on the board? Let's take him. All right, who's the best player on the board? Let's take him. But let's just look at it just from these three guys that you outlined, right? So Quiddy Pay, Greg Newsome, Caleb Farley. And Quiddy Pay is the defensive end for Michigan. Greg Newsome, corner from Northwestern. Caleb Farley, corner, Virginia Tech. So some of the big things that, and this is from our conversation with Brent a few weeks ago, and then also just kind of looking at that class as a whole. One thing that stood out, no red flag players. They didn't take any guys with character red flags, with athleticism red flags, speed red flags, medical red flags. Could that potentially eliminate Caleb Farley? Dane and I talked about that earlier. We'll see. We'll see if that's something that where he comes off boards due to the medical check that just happened recently out in Indianapolis. Now, the next big thing, youth. 5 of 7 picks were 21 years old in their rookie season. So that still keeps on the board. Both Quiddy Pay and Greg Newsome, both those guys check that box. Not afraid of guys with traits that didn't produce at high levels in college. That was one thing that we kind of noticed as well, looking back at some of those players. Both Pay and Newsome kind of fit that, right? Both guys, not super productive, some meat left on the bone, but athletic traits that you can kind of work with. And I think both of those guys go. And I think it goes back to what I asked her earlier with Kiwi. It's all going to come back to the board and how they view it. If Caleb Farley is the best player on their board and he cleared the medical, then guess what? I think that would be the pick. If Greg Newsome is the higher pick, and let's say, or is higher on the board, and Caleb Farley's off of it, and they have him higher than Pay, I think that's the way that they would go. If they like Pay more, then that's the way that they'll go that direction. I think this is a team right now, even though they made that huge stride last year and obviously picking 26 for a reason, I think they'll still go with that best player available mentality. That would be my guess, just looking at how they are building that roster. So Lou, great question. Kiwi, great pair of questions. Thanks so much to both of you guys for your continued support here of the podcast. Excited for what we've got later coming this week. Greg Cosell and I, we're going to keep the corner discussion going. We're going to talk about some of the guys that are kind of flying under the radar for Greg. So we'll keep that going here later this week. I've got another great guest lined up as well. Ben Fennell will be back later this week. Excited to keep things going right here on the Journey to the Draft podcast. Draft just around the corner. Looking for a unique experience for the young Eagles fan in your life? Eagles virtual youth football and cheerleading clinics are now being offered on April 25th and May 16th. Register today at PhiladelphiaEagles.com/clinics.